Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thrilled that you're here. Stick around. I've got a really incredible guest today. She's got quite the network. You're going to hear about that when I formally introduce her. Today's guest is on a mission to help leaders work together toward a bright future for all. She's editor-in-chief of the Apex Award-winning Leader to Leader Journal, founded by Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient Frances Hesselbein, and partner and trusted advisor to former CEO of Boeing and Ford, Alan Mulally, considered one of the greatest leaders of the 21st century. Her fields of expertise are leadership, management, personal leadership development, and executive and business coaching. For over 20 years, as COO of Marshall Goldsmith Inc., she led many initiatives, projects, and programs, including the 100 Coaches Project. Her expertise supported the success of Marshall Goldsmith's New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books, Triggers, and What Got You Here Won't Get You There. She's authored and edited many books, including Making Waves with former CEO of Celebrity Cruises, Lisa Lutoff-Perlo, and Work is Love Made Visible with Marshall Goldsmith and Frances Hesselbein. Please join me in welcoming Sarah McArthur. Welcome, Sarah.
Well, so happy to be here, Robbie. Thank you so much for asking me to join you today.
And in the global scheme of things, you are a neighbor coming from nearby Pennsylvania. Thrilled that you can join us. And as I mentioned to you, this is a show about building strong networks, and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Well, how I define leadership is a longer story. It came to me working with Frances Hesselbein, and Frances always said when we would meet, she would always ask me this question: "What do you see when you look out the window that's visible but not yet seen?" And over time, I finally came up with the answer that for me is my personal definition of leadership. And to me, leadership is working together towards a bright future.
I love it. And how did you first connect with her? That seems like having her tutelage and guidance helps you kind of frame that.
It did. I met Frances through Marshall Goldsmith in probably 2000. I became very aware of her through the books and articles and all the content that I was helping Marshall with. And we, over the years, developed a very strong, very close relationship, Frances and I. And she taught me so many important lessons about leadership along the way that are absolutely so incredible. And there are so many of us who had the opportunity to learn from her while she was here. She was former CEO of the Girl Scouts from 1976 to about 1990. And before that, she held many positions in the Girl Scouts. So a lot of times I'll go places and talk with women and say, you know, I knew Frances Hesselbein. She's the CEO. She was the former CEO of the Girl Scouts. And they say, "Oh, Frances, I remember Frances." And not a person that I talk with didn't have the most extraordinary experience, both of who she was as a friend of the heart and then also who she was as a leader.
That's really lovely. I will make sure we put some information in the show notes so folks who want to understand more about her legacy can do so. When did you first start to realize you had some skills around leadership? Like let's go kind of back in life. I'm always curious who people were when they were growing up. Who were you in the playground? Did you organize people back then? Were you someone who stood out? Did teachers notice you and see potential in you? Did you see yourself raising your hand a lot? Like, what kind of kid were you?
Interesting. My story, this is a great question, takes me back. Growing up in my formative years, I always, people say, where are you from or something? And I always say, well, I was raised in a van. And so in my formative years, my parents and my sister and I, we traveled the world in a Volkswagen van. So we went to different countries. We went to, countries in Europe. We were in the Sahara. We were in Northern Africa. We were in Panama. We drove to Panama from San Diego. We were in Russia. I mean, we were all over the world in that van. And one of the things that is so interesting about that is when Frances, back to that question earlier, when Frances first asked me, what do you see when you look out the window that's visible but not yet seen by others? I went right back to those formative years, before double digits, those formative, well, and then a little bit after those double digits, but those very formative years where my window, when I looked out the window, I would see all different countries, all different cultures. We were living in the van, so we weren't staying in different hotels and just spending overnights. We were living in these countries in a moving vehicle. So my window was all these different cultures and countries and peoples. And my leadership of working together towards a bright future is definitely based in those formative years where I saw the challenges of communication in these different areas. I saw different cultures. So I wasn't raised in one spot where I saw, which is wonderful, I just wasn't, where I saw one culture. I saw this mosaic of the world. And so that really forms my leadership today. And one of the things, back to Frances, of course, because Frances and I are in tandem here. One of the things that Frances shared with me so early on, I was working on a book with Marshall Goldsmith, executive coach, #1 executive coach, and best-selling author of What Got You Here and Triggers, and a man named John Baldoni. And I asked them if they would co-edit a book with me. And so I was able to ask a number of maybe 20 or maybe 25 or 30 different contributors to contribute an article about what these thought leaders, government leaders, corporate leaders, executive education leaders, coaches, what these thought leaders thought about leadership going forward in their own niche, from their own perspective. And one of the contributors who I asked was Frances Hesselbein. And she said, of course. And she sent me back an article. So I had, 25 or 30 different articles, and I've been working in leadership for quite some time. So I've read a lot of leadership, and I know the subject pretty well. Frances sent an article, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. Sitting in a chair, doing my editing in the morning, reading what had come in, and reading Frances's article. And I even right now reading Frances's article. And it is the first article about leadership that ever made me cry. So as I'm reading it, tears coming down my face, what was so special about that article to me is that Frances was sharing about respect for all people. And what really touched me was that I thought, if Frances can lead this way with respect for all people, if she can be who she is and lead how she does, so can I. And, tears streaming down my face. And I think this was in 2005 or 6. It was a number of years ago. And from that, my leadership has grown into that personal definition of leadership, which to me is leadership is, for me, working together towards a bright future. So I'm always, how can we work together? And along the way, I've found people who are definitely along in the same vein as Frances and I, like Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Boeing and Ford, who's, wouldn't you know, his leadership and management system is called Working Together. I said, that must be him. And so very fortunate in this way to really be able to follow my heart where it comes to leadership. And that definitely was shown to me by Frances, that we can be who we want to be who feels right with us, and make the world a better place with our leadership. I'm just, that's
There
what
is
I got
so
out of
much
it.
to dig into here. I mean, for one, you more than most, more than almost everyone else on this planet, really understands what it means working together, because you have lived amongst so many different communities, cultures, people, belief systems, right? Religions. And so most of us grow up in a more homogenous, space, and we branch out from that. If we're fortunate, we find ways to diversify the people we are around so that they don't all look like us, have the same upbringing, the same belief system. But it's effort to really branch out and to sustain those kinds of connections across difference. You grew up with that being your norm. Your norm was that difference is just like a reality. Like, there's no one world view. When you look out the window, it depends on where you are. It depends on, where you are in life and where you are, in socioeconomic status, and where you are with all whatever it is. It's like you just have such a rich tapestry of experience that like leads you to see things differently than the rest of us. And then to have the guidance of someone who sort of named that for you and really put a fine point on what you could do as a leader, gave you kind of a focal point to lead from. And your life's been really enriched by some really incredible leaders that you like, not just by your sense of their being incredible. They've been recognized by lots of people as being really wonderful leaders in the work that they do and the impact they've had. It's really interesting. I always say I'm waiting to be surprised on this show to hear a different definition of leadership or have a different experience shared. Thank you for doing that, because 350 plus episodes in, I think yours is a really different take, and yet comes to the conclusion that we all hope to have, which is work together, create this brighter future. Um, when you were younger, I mean, this is such a different experience, living out of the VW van, going around the world. What were your parents on a mission to do certain things? Were they doing work while they were doing that? Was it like, were you following around someone's career? Like, what led to this incredible experience?
So my stepfather was in the Peace Corps, and I just always, he was just a traveler. He loved to be on the road. He was also a probation officer, um, and he always loved to travel. And he didn't travel in the way, some people travel. He was in the culture. He was living where he was. He was fascinating. The only person who really reminds me just so much of him in how much he is just such a natural traveler is Marshall Goldsmith. Just very natural, can be anywhere and be all right. And my mother, she was an artist, and she coordinated the American Language Institute at San Diego State University. So she um, she was she saw things a little bit differently in the world. Neither of them were working at the time we did this, they would work when we came home, and then we would go off again. So they were supporting their love for travel and learning about all these different cultures. And my mom, she loved to go to all the museums. I took a trip with her one time later. I think I was just out of college, and she was coordinating the program at San Diego State, the American Language Institute. And we went on a couple-week trip to Spain. So I did all the driving because I love to drive, and she wanted to go to all the museums and the monasteries, and she loved to try all the different foods. So it was like I made her a T-shirt that said, "Mom is meals, monasteries, and museums," because that's what she loved to do. And I what I love to do is sit in a park and just be where I can watch the different people, or find different types of music. What's the music in the area? One of my favorite things to do to learn about where I am, turn on the AM FM radio, and what are they listening to? What's the music here? What are the talk radio shows here? And so, if people travel with me in a car for a few days, they're going to get to see, or hear what are people listening to here. So
it's really clever. Yeah. It's even if you're just driving around a country, like even here in the US, there's regional differences in what's going to show up on the radio. That's a really interesting way to get a sense.
Absolutely.
Personally, I like going to thrift stores. That's become one of my go-tos because they're in neighborhoods. They're not on the main strip. Once you find the local thrift store, you can also find what's happening. You find the local coffee shop. You find a bulletin board. You see local activities.
Right.
You ask the person behind the counter, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in these things." Yeah, so it's like I agree with you. I'm not as well traveled, but I really love the idea of getting to know what's happening locally. I'm at 12 or so, 12, 13, when you're just starting to get a sense of life in front of you, not just being a kid.
Right.
Did you have a sense of what would happen next? Was college, for instance, a guarantee you must go to college? Did you have a sense of a profession you were going to have? Like what were your main interests and ideas of yourself in the future when you were that young?
Oh, for me, starting living in the van and then going forward, I always, what I love to do is read and write and communicate. And communication to me isn't saying something. Communication is being heard. So if I say something or I write something and the audience or the person I'm talking with doesn't understand, it doesn't mean I say it louder. It means, take a step back. Do I need to rephrase? Is this, maybe this is something they're not going to be able to understand. So communication isn't saying something. Communication is being heard. So early on, it was reading and writing. Always wanted to be a writer. Always wanted to be a communicator and to help others to communicate, because it's really not so much about me, though I love writing stories, and I love writing leadership and management. And I just love when I write something and I can look back on it in a couple of weeks or when it gets published and go, wow, I wrote that. I thought that. It's amazing the power of words, the power of the words that we choose. I love helping people, supporting people in choosing the words that they are going to use to communicate with others. And I love doing that for myself too. That's why editor-in-chief of the Leader to Leader is perfect. I love inviting people to contribute. like yourself. I love inviting people to join the party at Leader to Leader. It's like I'm hosting a party for all of my friends. But then I also have the opportunity to write and to communicate myself. So it's not just about me communicating. It's about always working together towards a bright future, communicating together towards a bright future. This is how we do it. Doesn't mean we always have to agree. It just means we're all in this together.
Mm. So it's interesting because you had the real passion around writing and communicating. When did you start to realize that you could get paid to do that? Because I've met a lot of speakers, for instance, who, it was a light bulb moment when they realized, wait, people get paid to do this. So when did you go from this is a thing I really enjoy and I'm good at and it feels good to it being a vocation? Like, was that something that started to happen in college? Like how did you sort of find yourself on that path?
I've just been on this path and I didn't really realize, and I think I'm realizing it. I'm still realizing it because I love what I do so much. I love what I do so much that to be also paid for it and appreciated for it supported to support myself in this way is incredible. It's incredible. It's just what I've always done. It's what I've always done. Over the years, I went to, when I went to college. So I went to the University of Oregon. So I'm a Duck. If you ask me about any sport team in the entire planet, I will just repeat to you, go Ducks. This is all I know. So when I went to college, there's just a couple of things that I really care about. And so they asked me, what is your, what are you going to major in? And I said, well, what I know is I know how to read and write in English. So I'll major in English. And I'll get to read and write. And then I also so much love and want to support and have a passion for nature. So I also have an environmental studies degree. And then later on, maybe I think I'd been working with Marshall and had worked at Harcourt Brace Publishing Company. I'd worked in Panama as the managing editor of an English language newspaper. I'd worked with Tony Robbins on his content creation. And then, of course, I'd worked with Marshall for a decade and maybe a decade or more on, maybe 30 or 40 different books and articles and websites. So I was definitely in the realm of publishing, and I knew pretty well how this goes and the different aspects of it. And so it was in 2015, or I think it was 2015, I decided I was going to get a master's in publishing from George Washington. And I remember telling a few people, one of my mentors, Larry Lyons, who I was fortunate to co-edit a book with, before I got the master's, and Marshall and a few others, that I was going to get a master's in publishing from GW. And they said, why? I mean, you could teach the classes. And I said, I know it from my perspective, from the work that I've done. I understand publishing from the work that I've done so far, but I don't know it from other perspectives. And I really want to learn that. And it was one of the best experiences. I learned so much, and I've put into practice so much from, getting that master's in publishing a few years ago.
This is really interesting. One, I just want to note that you are a lifelong learner. You're humble enough to say there's more to learn. I only have my own perspective. Again, going back, I believe, to your growing up, understanding that there are so many perspectives in the world, and yours is just one and not the only, and not the one you have to stay stuck on. So you really, even though you had your own experience, you're like, I still want to know what others know so I can kind of create the best possible outcome. You've also name dropped Tony Robbins, and I just have to say, you know a lot of household names, and people who should be household names, and maybe are in certain circles, like Frances, for instance, like certain sectors, she's a rock star. So how did you start that journey? How does your network go from, kid in college in, University of Oregon, go Ducks, and
Thank you.
and then you're making your way, like every other young adult, you're making your way into the world. It happens. I think you're catching these people when they're there at the beginning of their careers in this way too. So you kind of coming up alongside them. But where do you start to cross paths with these people and start to kind of veer off you could have been in a PR firm. Like you could have easily just ended up doing press releases in the most dull way possible. Like not in this innovative, creative, forward-thinking thought leader space that you ended up in. What was the beginning of the transformation of your network to allow that possibility to happen?
Probably, I'm a risk taker. I don't seem like one and I don't feel like one, but I look back and go, oh, I think I am one. So I worked at Harcourt Brace in San Diego for a couple of years, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I then found an opportunity, sort of created an opportunity to work down in Panama City, Panama, on this English language newspaper. It came out every couple of weeks. So for me, luckily, I seem like a thinker, probably, but I'm also, I just something seems like it seems like a good idea, and I don't second guess myself. I go for it knowing, it's going to work out the way it's supposed to work out. So I took that opportunity and grabbed it and went to Panama and worked on that newspaper. And when I came back, I was freelancing. So I started a little freelance boutique editing, writing company, just me. And I think I called it High Tide because I lived in San Diego, and and then Tide is edit backwards. So it was
very poetic.
And I had to explain it to people. So not so great, but when you have to explain things like that, it means that, it's not quite doing the job, but it was fine. And then I wanted to have a full-time salaried job. I think I was 25, 26. And so I was looking, and I found in the newspaper, the actual newspaper, classifieds, an opportunity with Tony Robbins to be part of his creative team. And so I interviewed for the opportunity, and I got it. So I was there for 2 or 3 years and got to work on the creative team. So working directly with Tony to help him create his courses, his books and articles. I did a lot of his media prep. So I was preparing him to go on the Larry King show, all these different talk shows. And it was a great experience. And we worked so hard. The team and we're all still close. And it's been a number of years. We're all still very close because we worked hard together. We really prepared Tony for what he was doing. We were working so hard on all these manuals and translating the manuals for the courses and the recordings that he was doing, all the recordings that he would do. So it was just such an opportunity. I always call it I always look at it like, how you hop on the treadmill and you bump up the speed. Well, this was like I jumped on the treadmill. We were going 6 miles an hour, and it was like on.
You are definitely a risk taker, but you also, I feel, have lived enough to believe in yourself and your abilities. So to our minds, you're taking much bigger risks than what it probably feels like for you. taking the job, for instance, even in Panama, which is, moving outside of your everyday life. For you, that was not nearly as difficult as those of us who've never moved about and lived amongst other cultures. So it is interesting where you have had an upbringing that made that possibility more of a possibility. But you also did say yes. You didn't just look at it. You went and did it. And it's interesting that by your mid-20s, you'd already worked at one place, worked at also the Panama. So you'd had a couple of different work experiences, did a little bit of your own thing. So you'd experienced life as a freelancer. You're moving into your late 20s and you're like looking for something a little more stable. Tony Robbins classified ad. I've never heard anyone say this. This is amazing. And obviously other people got on his creative team through a classified ad because that's what you did then. About what year is this all happening? Like, give me a general sense of time frame.
So I came back from Panama in 1995, and I think I began working with Tony in 1996. And I worked with.
He was already on Larry. He was a big deal by then. Like
we were coaching. He was coaching Greg Norman, the shark, the golf player. I mean, we were having so much fun. I think that was. I know that was around the time that he was in the movie with might have been Jack Black and Gwyneth Paltrow, Shallow Hal or something. I mean, we had so much fun. We would go to events, teach people, personal development with Tony. It was just an incredible experience. And I would not, just like everything else that I've had the opportunity to do, I would not be doing what I'm doing today or know what it is to really go all out. I would not be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't done what I did then. So I am so grateful for every experience that I've had, the people that I've gotten to learn from, the relationships I've had. Some people, they get tired of a place or they want to move on. And so they will create a reason to leave and burn some bridges. I'm fortunate in that I have all these relationships that go back as far back as I do. So I have all these relationships that I continue, and they're so important to me. Mulally has a wonderful quote, and it is, and I say it in every presentation I have, for the great achiever, it's all about me. And for the great leader, it's all about them. And we are all, in my mind, we are all both. So as I've gone along in my journey, I have achieved, as have you. I mean, that's what we do. We work hard and we achieve our goals. And as a great leader, it's all about them, meaning the people around me are a reflection of if I'm leading in the way that I want to be leading. So if the people around me, to me anyway, if the people around me are negative and just not the people that I want to be around, that's a reflection, right? Mm-hmm. So I make my leadership all about you. This isn't about me. What I'm doing here today isn't about me. What I'm doing here today is about you. It's about us.
Love that. All about you. When you left Tony Robbins, having that on your CV is awesome, right? Because you've also been exposed to the people he's met. You have such experience of not just thinking about how to do these things, but you've been doing actively running a company like that, working with someone of that stature. What pulls you away? Like, what was the thing you wanted to do next, and where did you end up going?
So what pulled me away is I have that entrepreneurial spirit, and I really wanted to work in leadership and management communication. And so I left Tony Robbins and went to out on my own. And I was working with, now I have SD Edit, San Diego Edit, because that's where I was living. And people got that a little bit better. And I started working with different people, and a friend introduced me to a woman who was working on her dissertation. So I helped her with that. She said I did a great job. And she said, if I ever wanted to work with somebody in leadership and management communication books, then there's this guy, Marshall Goldsmith, that she has worked with. And she, she gave me his number and she said, give him a call. And I said, boy, howdy. So I immediately gave Marshall a call. This was in January or so, January of 2000. So I give Marshall a call. And Marshall says, he answered the phone. Who are you? And I said, Sarah McArthur. And he said, what do you do? I said, well, I work on books, leadership and management content. And he says, oh, that's great. Well, give me a call in July. Click. I go, okay. So I do my work. And then in July, he said in July, hi, Marshall, it's Sarah McArthur. You told me to give you a call in July. Oh, who are you? Sarah McArthur. Talked with you in January. You said give you a call in July. And so here, if I wanted to work in leadership and management books and content, he says, oh, great. Okay. Well, I'm working on this book. It's all these authors and contributors. Can you do something like this? And I said, well, yes. He says, well, and who recommended you? And I said, Vlasta Domin. And he said, oh, great. If Vlasta says you're good, you're great. And I said, okay, well, do you want to see my resume or anything? Nope. Vlasta says you're good. You're good. I'll send you the stuff and we're on. And after that, I worked with Marshall for the next 20 years, the first 10 years in publications. So books and articles and all the written content. And then the next 10 years in doing that. And then also as chief operating officer of his company. So running all the programs and the events and the projects, and an experience I wouldn't miss for the world. And I'm still very close with him, but now I'm back out again on my own. So,
I mean, Sarah, the fact that you had this Midas touch moment twice and they weren't even related, like it wasn't that a direct connection from Tony to Marshall, right? That you went out on your own, you did good work, your work was recognized as quality. Someone thought you could help someone else. Now, did you know who Marshall was before all this? Because you weren't in the world of coaching. You didn't. Okay. So there's a couple of things. One, you took the risk and made the phone call. And these days now in, this particular year we're in, the idea of calling someone randomly out of the blue feels very odd. But back then we didn't text people before we called them, like we just called them. But then you followed up as he asked you to, at the time he asked you to. You didn't let that slip. And a lot of people, I think, listening, may realize there are opportunities that they're passing them by because they're not taking they don't have a process for capturing those leads and those ideas and following up. I mean, your life could have taken a far different turn if you'd gotten swept up in some other projects and never gotten back. And that also the high level trust of a trusted referral. I think that is something else to underscore, that even though you had at that point a really good CV, no one needed to see it because of the trust of that one person that he knew and he trusted. That was it. Like you were in. And then of course your work spoke for itself. Once you were in, you continued to see opportunities. But a lot of people could really learn just, to do a better job following up and taking the risk of making the call and making the personal connection. It's pretty incredible. And of course, once you know Marshall, you know a lot of really great people. I mean, that's just the world he's in. and the people he attracts. This is really interesting, because then you're able to continue developing your own love of writing and communicating. What led to you deciding yet again to go out on your own? You have this entrepreneurial spirit quite clearly, but what was the attraction? What's pulling you in this direction?
Well, that was external circumstances. So in March of 2020, when the world, basically, at least where I was living, we shut down. And so Marshall, I was working with Marshall then. Marshall's what he was doing completely changed. So all of the events that we were doing on location, all of these things that we were participating in, all the flying around the world and doing all these things, stopped. And so Marshall and I made a decision together that I would venture out on my own. And we'd been planning this. We were going to do this, but not then. We were going to wait a couple of years, and, he's going to retire and I'm going to move on my own. But this happened sooner. So we made a decision together that I would go out on my own, and at an interesting and difficult time.
Yeah.
And he would, because he was dropping back. So, 90% of what he had been doing, he wasn't going to be doing anymore. And so we made that decision together, and he is so supportive and so kind to me in as I've grown. And I think he feels sort of like I always look at it like I was a little bird in the nest, in this Marshall Goldsmith nest, and I had to jump out and see if I could fly, and I can.
And what has your work transformed to in the last 3 years?
Oh, enough to bring tears to my eyes. I am so incredibly fortunate. My work has come to, now I'm editor-in-chief of Leader to Leader Journal, which was founded by Frances Hesselbein. As we heard in my bio, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, former CEO of the Girl Scouts, chairman of the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Forum, which it became after a number of iterations. I am thought partner with Alan Mulally, who is former CEO of Boeing and Ford, incredible leader. So we're working on his book, and we do a lot of communication. So just my favorite thing, we communicate with different groups. We consult. It's just an incredible opportunity. What we get to do is incredible, and I get to learn so much about my favorite subject, which is working together. A little bit about that. The working together leadership and management system and its culture of love by design are built on the foundation of Alan's principles and practices for organizations, which are things like people first, love them up, facts and data. They'll get you everywhere. We love your opinions, but really we need to see the facts and data. Transparency, respect for all people. And then my favorite is have fun, enjoy the journey and each other, but no jokes at each other's expense, because we want that safe environment where we are all able to share what's happening so that we can all be successful. So this working together towards a bright future for everyone.
I love this. I'm going to make sure that there are links in the show notes to all these resources. And if you have any in particular you'd like me to include, share them with me, and I'll make sure they get added, because there's a lot of, I feel like this is one of those episodes where the show notes will just be so rich and will lead people to continue to learn and grow for themselves. And you're introducing them to people they may not have known about or only heard of in passing. Before we get to my favorite wrap-up question, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor. All right, my wrap-up question is this. A year from now, I hope that we are still in touch. I'm so glad we met through Jennifer Nash. She had her book launch, and I'm really grateful that we connected. I'll put a link to her book as well, Lead Human, Be Human. And, she had quite a lineup. Alan was there. Alan did the forward for her book, which is really generous. So a year from now, when we connect, I'm going to ask you what you've been celebrating. Like what has gone really well in the next year? And I'm curious, like, what are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
So many things. Top of mind. We're working on a documentary about Frances Hesselbein, her life, her leadership, and the impact that she's had on all of us. So I am looking forward to, in a year from now, celebrating the grand opening, the screening of our documentary, and how everyone has come out to watch it. It's getting rave reviews, and it is helping all of us to work together towards that bright future.
I love that premiere. We should all let us know when it does happen. I want to help you promote that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to celebrate all of that with you. And thank you for this really invigorating conversation. How can people find you, follow you, learn more about your work?
I have a website, sarahmcarthur.com. You can reach out to me directly, and that's pretty easy as well. It's sarah@sarahmcarthur.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, Sarah McArthur.
Fantastic. We're going to put all those links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been